Okay, so welcome everyone to this book presentation. I'm very glad to have you all here. So I'm going to share our keynote cover. So we have something to look at besides our little faces. So today we're going to do the book presentation of the 2 volumes of William Lilly, The Astrologer, a book of sources. And we have 3 speakers, myself, Susan, and Barbara Dunn. So I'm going now to introduce our first speaker. So Barbara, she is the principal of the qualifying horary practitioner and an author and researcher of astrology for long years with some books published. And more recently, she has completed her PhD in the history of medicine, which was funded by the doctoral studentship of the Wellcome Trust, a very known, well-known research center regarding the history of medicine. And she is currently working on the monograph of that PhD thesis, which will present the results of her research. And it should be published by Springer in 2026. And we're all looking forward to reading it. So, Barbara, I will pass the mic on to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today, Sue and Louise, and I'm very pleased to be talking a little bit about our favourite astrologer, William Lilly, and also discussing Sue's wonderful 2 new volumes about Lilly and the source material. So before I start on Sue's work, I'd like to briefly say something about Lilly. Perhaps for people who are not as familiar as we are with Lilly. And I think it's important to say that despite what historians have said about Lilly, and sometimes in quite disparaging ways, he was an extraordinarily successful practitioner, and his practice was built upon expertise in judgment and precision in his calculations. Robert Hand pointed out that Lilly was the chief astrologer of the English school in the mid-17th century and assumed himself the position of an equal to the masters of the tradition who preceded him in the Latin and Arab world. Now, we know that Lilly had a range of admirers. He had students, there were enthusiasts, clients, patients, and he had a huge readership. And I would suggest that Lilly's reputation as the foremost astrologer of his generation was fully justified, and the powerful men who numbered among Lilly's clients and his patients and friends, such as Whitelock and Elias Ashmole, were a consequence rather than a cause of Lilly's success. Now, we know a huge range of Lilly's work was published: almanacs, pamphlets, his masterpiece, Christian Astrology, in 1647, and Anima Astrologiae in 1676, which is a collection of Bonatti and Cardano's aphorisms, edited by Lilly, translated by Coley. Towards the end of his life in 1665, Lilly left London and betook himself to the study of physic, which is medicine, and a medical license was granted in 1670. Lilly's role as a medical practitioner hasn't been explored, although my forthcoming book does include a chapter on Lilly. Because Lilly didn't provide therapeutics, it's been assumed that he had no interest or role in medical provision, but in fact he provided diagnosis and prognosis from a chart, which hasn't really been conceived by historians as a medical service. And in fact, it wasn't really conceived by contemporaries as a medical service, but an astrological service. So how have historians treated astrology generally? I think we need to look at that before we can put Sue's work into context. Well, there have been plenty of disparaging comments made about astrology by historians. As far back as 1940, Don Allen, for example, in his Star-Crossed Renaissance, declared that there is enough in the careers of men like John Dee, Simon Forman, and John Lamb, enough glitter to compensate for their manifold craftiness and gargantuan deceits. And there are quite a few comments similar to that through the historiography. And I think that Lynn Thorndike, in his History of Magic and Experimental Science, was probably the first to acknowledge the importance of astrology in his serious and comprehensive treatment of various subjects in intellectual history. He proposed that belief in astrology, generally held by scientists and mankind for centuries, should be taken into account by every historian of the period prior to Sir Isaac Newton. But until recently, most historians haven't really heeded this advice. Anthony Grafton has suggested that more recent scholars do agree that historians of science cannot understand astrology if they start by despising its principles and its practitioners. They must ground themselves in the intellectual assumptions and practices of astrologers, in the technical language they spoke and wrote. But the problem for the historian, as Annabella Kitson noted, is it's an intricate subject and its grammar isn't easily grasped. So historical areas which demand an intimate knowledge of astrology, as many of us have, these areas tend to be ignored or skirted around. And even as recently as 2021, Helena Avalar felt it necessary in her book to point out that astrological materials seldom receive the attention that is naturally and deservedly granted to other historical documents. This historiography hasn't been very different for Lilly himself. Historians have tended to approach him in the context of a discredited art, his political allegiances, and his almanac authorship. But most of these studies, well, to my mind, they provide too simplistic an interpretation of Lilly and his practices. Henry Southerton, who edited Lilly's autobiography in 1822, viewed Lilly as a wily person from whom the weak and credulous sought introduction in destiny's dark counsels. And historians after that, Keith Thomas, Lilly was a devious character. For Bernard Capp, Lilly was a man of ingenuity and no simple impostor, but his ethics were questionable. More recently, Peter Stockinger and Susan Ward, in their book on Lilly, adopted a more sympathetic, and I might add, a technically informed approach to Lilly, and they highlighted the danger of relying on untrustworthy sources such as Gadbury. And unfortunately, as I think Peter and Sue pointed out, Gadbury's disparaging claims in relation to Lilly's work and his character have been largely accepted by historians. Anyway, on a more positive note, there is a growing body of scholarship acknowledging the intellectual seriousness of astrology. And this is, I suppose, mainly confined to European scholars and to medieval European astrology. And more recently, we've had the International Journal of Divination and Prognostication published in 2019 first, and then the Prognostication in the Medieval World. There isn't much astrological in that. There's also a range of work by English-speaking scholars. Some of it relates to Europe and some to England. But of particular importance for us, I think, are works written by those who are or have been practicing astrologers. So yeah, scholarship on European astrology and their practices is more abundant than that of English. There have been various historical studies of Forman and Napier, but these authors, again, they haven't engaged with astrology and they haven't understood the ways in which astrology shaped and informed the practices. When I was transcribing some charts from Forman and Napier at the beginning of my thesis, I had a lot of help from Cambridge University, which was great. I really appreciated it. But what I found quite astounding was that in their transcriptions of the charts and the questions, they didn't transcribe the astrological judgment. Now, I know they had to prioritize their time, and a team member told me they were not trained to transcribe the astrology. I understand the limitations on time, but it does underline an important point. that historians who research astrologers and their practices tend to be unconcerned or uninterested in their astrology. And this is partly because, not wholly because, but partly because it would require a technically informed understanding with which many historians are not equipped. So that brings me to Sue's work and the value of her book of sources. They are indeed of enormous value, and we are very lucky to have access to this material. And unusually, and for me, I'm very pleased, obviously relates to early modern England, which is my area of interest. Now, the advantage we have as astrologers, and obviously Sue, especially those of us who are well versed in what we call today traditional astrology, is our understanding of the astrological material. We know the ways in which this material was generated, we know what it can tell us, what it can't tell us, and we know how to make the best use of it. And I think this is very important. And it also allows us to revisit various assumptions that have been made by historians about Lilly and also about a whole range of other astrologers that I've come across in my work. Anne Geneva's book on Lilly is very interesting, but she studied astrology for 1 year, and that was not enough to understand even basic methods, quite apart from the very complex methodologies of practitioners such as Lilly. So Sue's work, Sue's volumes, are transcribed by a practicing astrologer. Her transcriptions from various manuscripts and print are accompanied by detailed annotations and glossary, which of course are very useful to astrologers. They're also very useful to people who are unfamiliar with astrology, to historians of astrology, to academics, and to many others researching various interesting facets of early modern life. And producing these works must have taken Sue many, many years and achieved through meticulous and painstaking research. And we know that Sue is very methodical in her research. And I know people might say, well, you can go to the Bodleian Library, the British Library, or the Wellcome, and you can see all these manuscripts. Yeah, you can, but it's a very lengthy procedure doing this, and it can be very expensive to stay in these places unless you have some sort of funding. And also you can do a lot of research, take photographs, get home to load them and find you've forgotten some or didn't do what you should have done. I know that some of them are now online, which is very useful. Some of Geoffrey Laneve's manuscripts are online, I think maybe all of them. But again, it's good to have a transcription. And also print. You can see print documents in early English books online, but if you don't have access via an institution, there's a subscription fee. So Sue's clear, accessible transcriptions of these documents, they provide us with an opportunity to significantly enhance our research. The information can be analysed more thoroughly. The findings can be shared more widely. And I think then that collaboration can be achieved more effectively. And all of this work that Sue's done ultimately advances the field of knowledge, in our case, astrological knowledge. The transcriptions provide us with a tangible written form of information without the challenges, certainly in manuscript, of deciphering illegible handwriting or struggling with smudged or faded pages. The writing of Simon Forman and Napier, for example, is really untidy. And as far as I can see, it has really dissuaded astrologers who don't have these paleographic skills. It's dissuaded them from studying their practice records. And I have to say, I'm one of them. It's a real chore having to look at their writing, and it takes such a long time to look at what they've written. You sometimes think, well, maybe I'll just look at another practitioner. Anyway, what I'd like to talk a little bit about now is Sue's transcriptions of some of the correspondence between Lilly and contemporaries, which I found really fascinating. Because for the researcher, for the astrologer researching like us, I've always tended to focus on Lilly's astrological work and his practice records. And I haven't often left myself much time to explore other types of sources. But it's these details which bring Lilly's life and really early modern life into focus so vividly. Lilly was given details of heavenly sightings like comets. He was asked for help or for favours, or he's been thanked for his help And I think this correspondence that Sue's transcribed is, to me, has been enormously interesting. And I'll just give you some examples before I conclude. A letter from William Andrews on 31st March 1656 to Lilly, thanking Lilly profusely for Lilly's commendation for Andrews' publication, The Astrological Physician of 1656. And he acknowledges the great favour and courtesy by your large commendations of that small work. In 26th of January 1647, Jeremy Shakerley writes to Lilly. He seems to have been aware that Lilly was going to deliver judgments of eclipses in his next year's Anglicus, his almanac. So Shakerley suggests it might be advantageous to have the eclipses calculated according to the exactest verifications of the sun's and moon's motions and the truest tables which can possibly be procured, lest the moments thereof, being anyway falsely set down, might perhaps render it, the predictions of the astrologers, less certain than it might otherwise be. And to this intent, says Shakerley, I've made bold to present you with a calculation of the moon's eclipse of 20th November 1648, performed by the, I think, philological tables of Bulliardus. I may have pronounced that wrong. And another one is a petition from the locals of Dysworth, where Lilly was born, with a request for Lilly to be their benefactor. And I think it seems to be relating to the provision of a school teacher. They believe Lilly to be a favourer of learning and a well-wisher to his native town and old neighbours of Dysworth. And they point out that with God's blessing, Lilly has been raised to a very fair and abundant fortune in the world. And this is in 1644. And they ask him to lay up some memorial of your good affection towards us, and thereby become not only a benefactor to our town, but to learning itself, and engage the thanks and prayers of your petitioners and humble servants. And of these 22 petitioners, one's William Lilly, which I think is Lilly's nephew, and there's a Roland Lilly, perhaps another relative, and a vicar, a schoolmaster, and others. And lastly, I'd like to just mention Lilly's will, again, transcribed by Sue. This will, dated 1674, was witnessed by Thomas Agar, apothecary, and Henry Rogerson. I don't know anything about Henry Rogerson, Sue might know. But in this will, we can see Lilly's, not only his extraordinary wealth, but his generosity to those around them. So he's going to leave to his wife, Ruth Lilly, all that parcel of ground called the Hurst Wood, estimated at 18 acres, all the profits from, the close called Conyers adjoining, and all the profits, 6 closes called Roberts Lane Close, 15 acres, the Wood Leecroft, the Corner Leecroft, 3 closes called Glinens, all by his estimation 2 and 20 acres. And that comes to over 50 acres of land in that area. After Ruth's death, all this is going to be bequeathed to Carlton Whitlock, son of Sir Bulstrode. And we then find out that Lilly leaves to his brother Robert £5, Robert's son William 20 shillings, and his sister Suzanne, Liz, I think it's Suzanne, 10 shillings. To Mary Wilson, £20 on her wedding day for a piece of plate, each of his 6 servants 20 shillings, and to the poor of the parish of Wharton, and the sum of £5, and to the poor of Hersham and Burwood £5, which is, I think, is all pretty interesting detail. Why he left his immediate family less than the others, his servants, for instance, or not much more than his servants, is a matter of conjecture. I've been thinking about that. So in conclusion, I do think that the research that many of us do into astrology is so important. And I also think that academia is starting to open its doors to astrology, and academia needs more of us. It could certainly benefit from the transcribed source material with annotations that we find in Sue's volumes. And I think it also depends on our approach, how we fill out our application forms. And I think there is scope for all of us being able to further our research and to even get funding for it. I managed to get funding for it, not because I did anything spectacular, but because I did a lot of work thinking about how astrology could be useful in early modern England, granted. And I eventually looked at medicine, but there's also the area of politics, social, cultural areas, and so forth. So I'd like to conclude with a big thanks to Sue for the work she's done, which must have taken a huge amount of time. I'd also like to say thanks to Olivia Barclay and her role in providing Lilly's edition of Christian Astrology, the republication of that work by Regulus in 1985. And a quote to finish from Henry Southerton, almost 150 years after Lilly's death. Now, Southerton himself, although scathing of Lilly in his edition of Lilly's autobiography, conceded, although somewhat ambiguously, that for Lilly, nothing was too high or low, too mighty or too insignificant for the grasp of his genius. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. Now it falls on to me to continue the presentation. So I'm having here a double role of hosting and presenting as well. And I'm going to add to a lot of what has been already said. And I would start first by acknowledging that although we should not judge a book by its cover, in this case, we can do it very well because this book has one of the most spectacular covers that I have seen in recent years, particularly with the topic of astrology. And I must say that all of Sue's recent books, all covers are of an exceptional design and quite out of the standard we see for astrological publications. So in that sense, very original. But this one is absolutely spectacular and very well deserved praise for its design and its original design. With that said, taking care of the cover, let's go on to the book. I'm going to add a bit of what Barbara Dunn has already said. She said a lot of the things that I was thinking about, and I agree wholeheartedly that there is tremendous value in the content of these two books, because exactly as it was said, they provide us with original sources, some of them difficult to attain, difficult for someone to study, as Barbara well said. It's easy to there is transcription needed. There's most of these materials are not available online, even in copies. So there's a lot of work and valuable work being done in this publication. And the first volume gives us material that regards Lilly's work, and provides a lot of material that is more accessible, but at the same time transcribed and annotated properly by someone who knows what she's doing, which is extremely important, as Barbara pointed out. Astrology to be studied properly by astrologers or by academics. And here we have a book of sources, which is extremely valuable for academics. It needs someone who understands astrology and can translate that practice to its proper place in history and in context. And Sue has extraordinary abilities to do that by her mastery of paleography, and of course, she's in an in-depth knowledge of the astrology of that period, and of course of Lilly. So the volume one has that to it, which gives us a lot of excellent, valuable sources for the historian and for those who want to study astrological practice of this period, particularly the Merlin Almanac, which is a core source for the mundane astrology of this period. So very important source. The most recent volume, and it's difficult to, I'm not comparing because the whole set is valuable, is extremely valuable, at least in my view, because it offers us full delineations of charts made by Lilly. And this is a particularly valuable kind of source, because most of the time when traditional astrology, so the astrology, in this case, the astrology of the early modern period, is being studied or restructured, rebuilt for practice, it's almost done out of theory in the things that are in theoretical books. And although that is extremely important and we couldn't go without it, there is a huge difference between theory and practice. And these examples allow us to understand how concepts are applied and to what extent they are applied in an actual practical delineation. And in particularly, Ashmole's Nativity, which is quite extensive and where Lilly poured a lot of his work and ingenuity into building, it is absolutely valuable to understand how the rules of astrology are applied to nativities. It is, I think, one of the most valuable transcriptions of the entire set, because it gives us a rare view of Lilly's practice of natal astrology, which we only had basically through the example he gives in his Christian astrology, in his printed work. And here we have several more, and one which is extremely complete. And we have an idea of how Lilly thinks that a complete delineation of the natal chart should be done. We have here what it is probably the only known, or the only one, deluxe, absolutely complete delineation that Lilly ever did, to offer, of course, to Ashmole, as a present to Ashmole. So he did everything that he could do to make it a perfect work, a perfect present. So it's incredibly valuable. I learned a lot on how certain techniques were applied by having access to this source. It is very, very, very important. So this, for me, is the best volume so far. But again, it provides us with Sue, with her work, has provided us with an invaluable set of documents that will help us understand, especially the astrology of the early modern period, of course, through the eyes of Lilly and his views on astrology, which, again, a well-known author, but not that well studied. This is sometimes surprising because you think, oh, Lilly, we have said everything that we needed to say about Lilly. But as Barbara pointed out, and I'm reinforcing that idea, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we don't know of him as a person, of his biography, but also of his work and his methodology and his application. And this is a gap that needs to be considered and filled as much as we can. And this is a great set to start with. And I think a lot has been said. I said what I really wanted to do and highlight the value of these sources and this type of source, and especially in the works, for the works of such a known practitioner. And now I'm passing the mic to Sue, the author, so she can also have her views.
Yeah.
Sue?
Thank you. Right, I should say first of all that both Barbara and Louise have used all the best words. So you're going to hear them all again, really. But I do want to extend my personal thanks to Barbara for so generously giving up her time today to be with us. I also want to duplicate Louise's praise for Prisma Edições, because they have made my work and William Lilly's look so good. And the cover designs, I can't really better what Louise has said. They are amazing, astonishingly good. And I think what Louise didn't say is that, yes, I mean, we discussed this, Louise and I, and he said, you would expect, wouldn't you, a book about William Lilly to have an image of William Lilly on the cover. But no one expected how that image was constructed. And I hope everyone who's got the book has found William Lilly's signature. But all of the book covers, whilst they are beautiful, artistic, clever, all of those things also show a very deep understanding of the contents of those books. And so I look forward, I mean, I am now looking forward to seeing the third volume, because I have no idea what it's going to look like, and look forward very much to working with Prisma now, continuing and in the future. Their patience and perseverance is outstanding, I have to say. So thank you to both, Barbara and Louise. The main reason, I suppose, has been summed up by both of them as a need for evidence. And this is how I see these volumes, as evidence. One, to counter or allow us to challenge some of the inaccuracies and baseless assumptions that have been made, both about astrology, but primarily about William Lilly. And this is both within the historiography and outside in more informal settings. The other purpose is to encourage that research which both Louise and Barbara have mentioned. This is needed in practical astrology. We might look at Elena Avalar's work as pioneering this, but we need more research into the practical side of astrology. And as Barbara said, this is not as easy to do as it might seem. First, you have to get access to these manuscripts, and these particular ones are in a private library, the Bodleian, so not just anybody can go there. Then you have to deal with the basic degradation of the material over time. Your paleographic skills have to be fairly good, and a knowledge of Latin, because they will often mix Latin and English in one sentence, sometimes in one phrase. So you have to be aware of those things. Add to that the technical complexities of astrology, and you are talking about something that is very, very time consuming, and most researchers would avoid it, will go round it. In the first volume, I give a picture of Lilly the man, as Barbara says, some of his personal correspondence and so on. And I also give a full transcription of Prophetical Merlin, which is an early publication from 1644. It is a treatise on political astrology. And although early, it was one that he stood by throughout his life. Now, for the researcher of this period, they will meet William Lilly most often through his annual Merlins. And they are essays in political astrology, each one of those. So it's good that I offer to them the foundation of those Merlins. I have heavily glossed that particular publication because, again, to offer that as an accessible entry into reading the material, but also because I want it to be seen that it is coherent in its own terms, that there is a system and a method, that there are rules. And so by reading through and following the explanations as best as I could, it offers you the opportunity to see that coherence, that he is not just pulling things out of the air to dupe a gullible readership. Now, in volume 2, yes, I move on to his commissioned work, the less frequent natal delineations. I would think that Withy polls delineation is probably the most common sort. Ashmole's is definitely not common. It is rare. And within that, again, from the researcher's point of view, within that, we see him taking a didactic role and instructing Ashmole. At least that's my reading of it. He is instructing. He's also discussing. He discusses his new position or his developed opinion on the part of fortune. He expands his use of the directions, not restricting himself to the 5 hieroglyphicals. And he talks about not really liking perfections, preferring directions instead. Nevertheless, he produces them. So what we have here is also doing for his best friend something that he had to convince Ashmole that he was unbiased. And he does that by producing all of his source references. This is in line with modern scholarship. So he produces all of those, a feature that is on its own is of interest to researchers when we're looking at transmission of ideas, for example. And so by doing that and producing all of those tables, you might think was unnecessary, but it isn't. It was very necessary. And having those tables, we see, researchers will see, this is not a game. This is not someone doing his party piece. This is serious. It is based on mathematics. It is calculated. And again, such a full and extensive delineation demonstrates coherence throughout. In fact, in my opinion, reading that delineation, it's almost a book. It's almost like it was fit for publication. It is an absolute masterclass in practical astrology, an absolute masterclass. It is amazing, and there are so few of them. So moving on to volume 3, which should be ready by the end of the year, at least later in the year, might be sooner. I move on to other matters relating to Lilly, producing more transcriptions of hitherto unseen manuscripts. But I also then, as you might expect from me, giving attention to his daily horary practice. And I'll be producing lots of examples of that practice. Now I'm going to tell you a story about that. And anyone who's worked with me knows that I like to tell a story. About 4 years ago, I dug out my collection of Lilly's horaries that I had obtained from the Bodleian when I visited there in the 1980s. So I've had them obviously a very long time. I have worked with them, I have used them, but what I had never done was concentrated and done a very focused analysis. And that is what I did. I had some 200 plus charts, and I did a full and detailed analysis of those charts. Now, what I should tell you, in case anyone gets excited, that in these practice books, the majority have little or no comment at all. You might get a word, 2 words, and that is the majority. But it is amazing what can be extracted even from those. And I did. And I was astonished at the amount of information that I did glean from those 200 plus charts. It formed the basis, eventually, of a chapter that I was kindly invited to contribute to an edited volume. And this will be of interest to you because we are talking about practical astrology. The edited volume is entitled Astrologers at Work, the essays on the practices and techniques of astrology, in memory of Elena Avila. Not just her memory, but in memory of her work too. It's going to be published by Brill. It will be out this year. The editors are Professor Charles Burnett and Louise Ribeiro. So it's a very interesting book, not least because I've got a chapter in it. So, but having written that chapter, having found that information, what this is a long way around to tell you, is that it became essential that we had the rest of the practice books. It was essential. And I moaned and groaned and complained about it for a long time. I'd written to the Bodleian to get a cost of reproduction, and it was eye-watering. So we thought, no, we won't do that. Instead, what happened was, and I'm sure I should take credit for this because I think he did this because he was sick and tired of listening to my whining and complaining. Louise just took himself to Oxford and photographed everything. Everything. And I met him in London afterwards. And sorry, that fly keeps following me around the house. I met him in London afterwards and he gave them to me. All of them. A lifetime's dream fulfilled. He gave them all to me. And since then, I have been working on the analysis. And this is going to form the basis of a project that I'm going to hand over to Louise in just a moment to talk to you about. And it is well underway. I have worked very, very hard and it is well underway. So before I hand you back to Louise, I just want to take the opportunity, in case I don't get it again, to thank you all so much for coming. I can't tell you what it means. It is so important to me to see you all. It's lovely. Thank you for taking the time. And because I am Princess Double Booking today, I'll be seeing some of you in the not too distant future in about an hour and a half or so. So thank you all for coming. Thank you. Louise.
Your
You're
voice is off.
muted.
Sorry about that. So I'm going to put here the contacts of the presenters here today so that we so that you can contact any of us should you have questions or any inquiries that you would like to fill up. But now, as Sue passed on to me, it is my pleasure to present a new project that Sue and I have been cooking for some time now. And it is, of course, related to what she just said. So this project is called the William Lilly Project and intends the systematic study of the entire of his workbooks. So to know the man, the astrologer, through his daily practice. And this is something which is incredibly important because so far we have highlighted sources, very important sources, such as the natal delineations I've just mentioned. But natal delineations are things that are done sporadically, I would assume, not at least to that extent of detail. But with the workbooks, we have his daily consultations throughout many, many years. And what the project has been doing, and as Sue said, it's well underway, is to catalog every chart, every question asked, highlighting any answers that are there, specific astrological methodologies used in these charts, etc., etc. And our purpose here is to introduce and provide you with a complete set of data that will help us to understand Lilly's practice and as well the practice of this period. This kind of work has been done in similarity, as Barbara pointed out today, for the casebook projects in the case of Simon Foreman and Richard Napier. But we are taking a different approach because we are focusing on the astrological practice, the role of the astrologer, and how does the astrologer solves these various problems that people come to him with. You know, how is this handled, and what does this tell us about the daily practice in this case of William Lilly? You know, how many clients, what time of day, etc. So this systematic study will provide, I think, a huge contribution to the legacy of William Lilly as a consulting astrologer, not just the man who published almanacs, the man who wrote one of the most impactful treatises of astrology of his period, and which is still impactful, as we've discussed, but also showing him as a working astrologer. So this is what we also wanted to present, the second highlight of today's presentation. Sue, do you want to add something?
Oh, I think you've covered it. And I think that part of the joy of doing work like this was some of the information that I extracted from those few charts, that small sample, was the fees he was charging, for example. Now, I know that has partly been known what he was doing, but not in this detail. I have found those, where he's put those and how much he's charging and who he's charging that money to. I was able to, we've all been talking about the rough ride Lilly is given in the historiography. Well, I was able to challenge two of those because of information that I found within those charts. So it is an extraordinarily important project, I think, and I'm very glad that I'm involved with it. I just need more hours in the day, so if someone could give me that, I'd be very happy. Thank you, Louise.
Okay, yeah, just to add also that this project is going to be done under the umbrella of the Astro project, so it will have it will be presented as an academic study of all this data, and it has been done in that with that purpose in mind. So this was the last item for today's presentation. I would open the floor to 2-3 questions if anyone has questions. If not, we'll just close the session here.
Okay.
Oh, well, no questions, which is okay. I think a lot have said today. So I thank you very much for being here. I want to thank Barbara Dunn for her presentation as well, to open all this wonderful lecture here. And hope to see you soon at the launch of the 3rd volume.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.